Good evening and welcome to Poetry at the Dalí. I am Hank Hine, I'm the museum director, and it's my honor to welcome you to this program, which is curated by Helen Pruitt Wallace, former poet laureate of St. Petersburg, but we tell her once poet laureate of St. Petersburg, always poet laureate. And she has done a wonderful job for a number of years, keeping a wonderful flow of inspired language coming through the Dalí Museum. We have some sponsorship from the city of St. Petersburg, believe it or not, and we're appreciative of that. Channeling William Carlos Williams, it is hard to get the news from poetry, but good people are dying every day from lack thereof. So it's our goal to supply that news, and we are very happy to have Victoria Chang with us today. I'm going to ask Casey Wolf to introduce her. Casey Wolf is a professor of poetry and head of the Creative Studies Department, Creative Arts Department at Eckerd College. So, Casey, if you would come forward and make this introduction, we'd appreciate it.
I'll actually allow Helen to introduce Victoria, and thanks for that introduction, Hank. And I just wanted to have a quick word of thanks for the collaboration with the Dalí Poetry Series and this wonderful work to do with Helen and Kim Aquare and Beth Bell and Hank here at Dalí. And I really wanted to thank as well the current poet laureate of St. Petersburg, Gloria Munoz, who's in the crowd with us tonight, who was really instrumental in helping us get this series off the ground a couple years ago. But it's a real delight to be back here at Dalí and to continue this wonderful relationship and to host Victoria as well. And so I hope everyone enjoys this, and I will yield to Helen here.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming back to the Dalí. It's a real treat to have you, and you even came in this crazy weather, God. But thank you for being here, and for those of you who are tuning in at home, thank you for that. And yes, we are so lucky to have our current poet laureate here. We're glad you could be back. Gloria. Gloria is doing all kinds of things in our community. She's busy just about every night. Creating just new venues and supporting poets from all over, and we're very lucky to have you, Gloria. So I want to also join with Hank in thanking the city for supporting our program, and want to do a shout out to all the many people here at the museum who have helped us develop the program, including our tech guys in the back. Thank you, Thomas and John, and of course, Dr. Kim, who was somewhere and always helpful, and Dr. Hank Hine. And before I introduce Victoria, I want to say that it really does give me a lot of pleasure to do this collaboration with Eckerd. Eckerd's very dear to my heart. I taught there also many moons ago, and so it's extra fun for me to have brought the two of us together in the program. I'd like to first, though, start by doing a shout out to Dr. Hank Hine. So Hank is just this next week going to receive a really big award. It's the highest civilian award that the country of Spain can give to a civilian. And it is to honor all the work he's done for the country of Spain, especially in the culture of Spain. And the name of the award, and he's going to Washington, D.C. To be inducted into the Order of, let's see, make sure I get it right, the Order of Isabel de Católica, and the Royal Spanish Order of Isabel de Católica. And it's a really, really big deal, and we're very proud of you, Hank. So glad that that's happening. Now on to the main event. We're super excited to have Victoria Chang here. I'm a huge fan of her work. I told her that I've read her work for a number of years, but today, in preparation for tonight, I just allowed myself the whole day to pour into all of her poems, and it was such a delight. And one of the things I love most about her poems is that even when she's writing about very serious things, she's writing with a lot of play. She allows herself to go so many places in her words, and it's as if you're inside her head as she's figuring things out, or even just trying to. She never seems to presume to have had them figured out, but I love so much about how you approach your work, both in your poems and in your essays. So Victoria Chang's forthcoming book of poems, With My Back to the World, will be published in 2024 by Ferrer, Strauss, and Giroux in the US and Corsair Books in the UK. Her most recent poetry collection, The Trees Witness Everything, was published by Copper Canyon Press in the US and Corsair Books in the UK, and was named one of the best books of 2022 by The New Yorker and The Guardian. Her nonfiction book, Dear Memory, was published by Milkweed Editions and was deemed a favorite nonfiction book in 2021 by Electric Literature and Kirkus. Her poetry collection, Obit, published again by Copper Canyon Press, which is, as you can tell, a pretty amazing press, was published in 2020 and named not only a New York Times notable book, but also a Time must-read book, and received the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and the Annis Field Wolf Book Award in Poetry, and the Penn Volkler Award. It was also longlisted for a National Book Award and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Griffin International Poetry. Wow, that's that's a lot. That's really amazing. Victoria is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, and she lives in Los Angeles and is distinguished faculty within Antioch's low residency MFA program. Please join me in welcoming Victoria Chang.
All right. Is everyone doing okay today? Yeah? All right. Let me set my timer. There. So thank you for coming out today, and I think I'm going to be reading some poems, and then I'll doing a little bit of Q&A after, I think. So, right? Q&A after? Yeah, a little bit of Q&A. So if you have questions, you can put them in your head now and ask them later. I first wanted to thank Dr. Hank Hein for hosting us and the poetry series, and also the Dalí Museum. Obviously, this is a wonderful, beautiful space. Also Casey Wolf for inviting me, and Eckerd College for hosting me, and also Helen Wallace for the introduction and for obviously running this wonderful series. It's a great service to the community and to poets at large. I am, just to give you kind of a little map, I'm going to read from 3 books, not that much from each one, just a little bit to give you kind of, or just to move around a little bit, and then I'll read a few new poems that are ekphrastic poems, which are poems that are in conversation with visual art, and that's why there's some slides. Also, I brought some slides just for you to have something to look at, and then a book I'll be reading from, it has a little bit of visual stuff, so I thought I'd bring those along as well. So I'm gonna start with my book Obit, and I always think about when people talk, it's like sometimes they say obit, sometimes say obit. I think that's interesting, but I'll say obit. And there's not much you need to know except that my mother passed away in 2015 of pulmonary fibrosis. So that's when your lungs sort of, they harden for some reason. I think they're not sure why, and then you gradually suffocate to death. So it's a pretty awful disease. And then my father had a stroke maybe 15 years ago now, and he passed away last January. So he's in here a lot because he lost a lot of his language. But I'll just read a few poems from here, and they're all in the shape of obituaries, and everything sort of dies. This one's called My Mother's Teeth. Thank you for coming. My mother's teeth died twice, once in 1965, all pulled out from gum disease, once again on August 3rd, 2015. The fake teeth sit in a box in the garage. When she died, I touched them, smelled them, thought I heard a whimper. I shoved the teeth into my mouth, but having 2 sets of teeth only made me hungrier. When my mother died, I saw myself in the mirror, her words in a ring around my mouth like powder from a donut. Her last words were in English. She asked for a Sprite. I wonder whether her last thought was in Chinese. I wonder what her last thought was. I used to think that a dead person's words die with them. Now I know that they scatter, looking for meaning to attach to, like a scent. My mother used to collect orange blossoms in a small, shallow bowl. I passed the tree each spring. I always knew that grief was something I could smell, but I didn't know that it's not actually a noun, but a verb, that it moves. This one's called Grief. Grief, as I knew it, died many times. It died trying to reunite with other lesser deaths. Each morning, I lay out my children's clothing to cover their grief. The grief remains, but is changed by what it is covered with. A picture of oblivion is not the same as oblivion. My grief is not the same as my pain. My mother was a mathematician, so I tried to calculate my grief. My father was an engineer, so I tried to build a box around my grief, along with a small wooden bed that grief could lie down on. The text kept interrupting my grief, forcing me to speak about nothing. If you cut out a rectangle of a perfectly blue sky, no clouds, no wind, no birds, frame it with a blue frame, place it face up on the floor of an empty museum with an open atrium to the sky, that is grief. And maybe I'll read one more from here. I always want to change my mind when I'm here. Let's see. Yeah, this one is called Chair. And I think this one, my father struggled with aphasia after his first stroke and then fell many times after that and progressively lost more and more of his language. Chair. My mother's green chair died on August 3rd, 2015. We arranged chairs in rows facing the same direction to represent reverence, in a circle to represent sharing, stacked to represent completion, hanging from the ceiling to represent art, in front of a desk to represent work. Before my mother died, I routed all her mail to my house. Her catalogs still come every day. I imagine her sitting in her chair, flipping through them for more shirts that look the same. I understand now, only the living change clothes. Last week, I took my father pants shopping. I heard him quarreling with the pants. He came out of the dressing room with his pants on backwards, 2 pockets facing forward, like my mother's eyes mocking me, as if to say, I told you so. He was angry, pointing and cursing at the chairs that no longer fit. I entered the men's dressing room and picked up all the pants on the floor because one of them had to be my missing father. So I think I will move on, if that's okay with you, which it is because you don't have a choice. So I'm going to move to this book, which I actually didn't intend to write this. And I was talking about this today. It just sort of came by accident. And so, my mother passed away, and I found all these boxes. She liked to hoard things. And I found this box with all these papers in it. And I was really excited at first. They were like birth certificates. They were just a lot of information I didn't know. I suddenly knew my grandmother's name, her birth date, what city she was born in, things that I just didn't know. And then I suddenly felt kind of sad about it because then I had all these questions, but I had no one to ask them to. And so I started writing a letter. I started writing a letter to my mother. And so these are epistolary kind of little mini essays or something or another, but I'll just read one. Dear Mother, I have so many questions. What city were you born in? What was your American birthday? Your Chinese birthday? What did your mother do? What did your grandmother do? Who was your father, grandfather? It's too late now, but I would like to know. I would like to know why your mother followed Chiang Kai-shek, taking you and your 6 or 7 siblings across China to Taiwan. I would like to know what was said in the planning meeting. I would like to know who was in that meeting, where that meeting took place. I would like to know the people who were left behind. I would like to know if there are other people who look like me. I would like to know if you took a train, if you walked, if you had pockets in your dress, if you wore pants, if your hand was in a fist, if you held a small stone, if you thought the trees were black or green at night, if it was cold enough to see your breath, to sting your fingers. I would like to know who you spoke to along the way, if you had some preserved salty plums, which we both love, in your pocket. I would like to know if you carried a bag, if you had a book in your bag, where you got your food for the trip, why I never knew your mother, father, or your siblings. I would like to have known your father, to know what his voice sounded like, if it was brittle or pale, if it was blue or red, to know the sound he made when he swallowed food. I would like to know if your mother was afraid. During college, I spent several weeks with her in Taiwan. She bought me baozi, or buns, every morning. The bao that steamed in small plastic bags with no ties, and sweet doujiang, tofu milk, always too hot for me to drink. She sat there and watched me eat, complained to me about your brother's wife, complained of being sick and how no one would help her. Do you know how long it took me to figure out how to call an ambulance? And then when they came, she refused to go. I still remember how the 2 men stared at me as if I could move a country. Listen, it's the wind. That's the same wind from your countries. Sometimes, if I listen closely at night, I can hear you drop a small bag at the door. I hear the sound of the bough touching the ground and the wind trying to open the bag. But when I open the door, there's nothing there, just the same wind, thousands of years old. Happy birthday, wind. Happy birthday, mother. April 6, 1940. I know this now. All the nurses, doctors, and morticians asked me, so I memorized it. Your American birthday, April 6, 1940. I said again and again, as if I had known this my whole life. Oh, no, you don't. That's fine. Thank you. Okay. So after I wrote that letter, I wrote another letter and another letter to my grandmother that I didn't know, to old teachers, to all sorts of people, to daughters. I have one in the back there who's here. So then I eventually started deciding to put some photos in there, and all the stuff that I found in my mother's box, I started putting them in this book, and it became this sort of like neophyte-y kind of collage thing. So here's one of them. This is actually I think one of the first ones that I made that really isn't much making. I just put a photo on the paper and then wrote a little poem and then cut out little slips of paper and didn't glue them on because it felt like they didn't want to be fastened. So I'll just read this one. Oh, I like this one because that's me in the white and I think I look really cute. That's my sister and that's my mother. And I like that kind of, do you remember that sort of 70s avocado green and the avocado green phone on the wall? I think the carpet is also avocado green and the wallpaper is avocado green. So there's a time when that was kind of in style. I hear the phone ringing, but I can't answer it. It is silence calling. So this is, again, my neophyte collaging, but at some point I remembered, and memory works funny this way, in that most of the time we remember small bits and pieces of things, or in some cases we forget things altogether. So at some point I'd finished writing this whole book and I remembered, oh, wait, I think I actually interviewed my mother once. And it was kind of a traumatic remembering because I recorded it, but I couldn't find the interview. Eventually I did. I had saved it on my computer. And I also remembered when I asked my mother if I could interview her, she was very reluctant. And then she asked my father, and he said no. And he was really upset for me even asking, like, he said, why would you be so interested in something so silly? And I'm like, so silly, that's your entire life. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that people don't want to talk about. So in some ways I was dredging it up. But here's just a little bit of a transcript of an interview with my mother who basically had, got in contact with a cousin. So when you leave a country, I mean, this is so obvious, but things bifurcate. So she left, but then a whole other side of the family remained in China and during the Civil War. And that, I don't know who they are, but they lived a really different life. And one time, I guess, like maybe 10, 20, who knows, 15 years ago, got in touch with my mother. And so she got the letter and she translated it for me aloud. Me, have you heard from your relatives in China? Mother, I just found my cousin. She's 2 years younger than me. She just sent me a letter. She's had a very hard life. She has 3 daughters. And then she translates the letter. And it pretty much follows history, which is the most incredible thing, because I studied this in college because I was curious. So I'll just read a little bit. 1950, cousin and family moved to Huabei and had to learn new thoughts. 1950 to 59, every 2 to 3 days, they had to participate in new movements to suppress the revolution and to fight against the Americans. They had to take all of their pots and metal doors and burn them to make steel. But moving away from farming led to starvation and famine. So that was the great leap forward. And then 1959 to 61, natural disasters, and then it keeps going. So 1966 to 71 was the Red Guard period. The government doubted everything and everyone. They came to our house and took away all of our jewelry and money. And then 1971, mother and father had no wages. They had to work in a school which had been turned into a farm. Father couldn't go home at night because we had to work. He slept with the cows. Only mother could return home. And it just keeps going for a while. And she read me the whole letter. And I'll just read the ending, which is, what you would, I think, maybe expect. 1975, farming, planting things, nothing to eat, no blankets at night. It was always very cold. Then father had a brain hemorrhage. He died when he was 51 years old. 1978, mother survived and had an okay life after that. None of us could go to college because we had been sent to the outskirts to do farming. 1980, we finally came home. And that just really contrasted so much with my own life and then also with my mother's life, obviously. So what's next? Oh, I'll just read one more from here. Yeah. And this one is, I thought this photo was kind of neat. I think that's my mother up top, and that must be her grandmother. So that means she's my great-great-grandmother. And then those are her siblings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there could be another sibling that maybe wasn't born yet. I'll just read the poem on here. Once you had to stand behind your grandmother who left a country, each of your feet lifted off the land onto the boat like nightingales. I imagined the night sky, you below deck, light coming from 2 moons, but only half of your face lit up. You stood still as the moons rearranged themselves. During the switch, language was lost at sea. When language belongs to no one, a door opens. Oh, we're there already. Okay. So I'm going to switch again, and then I'll switch one more time, just so you know, if you get seasick. I'm going to read from this book called The Trees Witness Everything. And this is my most recent book of poems, and they're these tiny little miniature poems. So they're all in syllabics. So they're kind of like, think of them as expanded haiku, expanded tankas, which are like 5, 7, 5, 7, 7 syllables. And they're all, I wanted to constrain myself because I didn't want to write about anything anymore. And so that was one way of constraining myself. And then I thought I would challenge myself more and use the titles of the poet W.S. Merwin too. Strange project, I know, but it was really fun. So I'll just read a few of these, and some of them are like 9 lines, some of them are 3 lines, so they're really tiny. Losing a language. We are born with a door on our backs. When will we know if it opens? Snowfall. We say the snow falls, but it really seizes. Because it is light, it takes 7 years to grab. By the time it does, the old wars are over, and my mother is dead. But it lands on the new wars, melts on a different mother. Still morning. No mornings are still. The newly dead move the most. They force flowers to dilate. Rain at night. To be the last drop of rain each night is sadness. It shuts the last door and jumps. The gods. The fact that leaves can't be put back on trees makes me think that you do not exist. The lovers. There is a wildfire starving on top of a lake. See how the water holds fire but cannot end it. We insist on love when all we want is mercy. And then I'll read 4 more little ones from this book, and they were all a part of a community project where we wrote poems of hope, which is harder than one might think. Poems of hope that ran across LED lights at 10 Los Angeles public libraries. And we also solicited poems from the community, and then we selected some poems to run across those LED lights too. So here's my attempt at hope, which could be a failure in your mind. I'll read 4 small ones. There is a bird and a stone in your body. Your job is not to kill the bird with a stone. Some of us are made only of nerve endings. At night, we light up like radium. One day, you'll wake up beating. One day, you'll wake up winged. Let me tell you a story about hope. It always starts and ends with birds. A little bit hopeful. So I'm going to read just a few new poems and then I'll stop. But these new poems are ekphrastic poems, and they're all in the visual art of Agnes Martin. And she's, if you don't know her, does a lot of grids and things, but I love her work so much. And this one is called On a Clear Day, 1973, but I'm going to skip it. That's what it looks like, the poem. I'm not going to read that one. Here's a trapezoid. Actually, maybe I'll read this one. Yeah, I'll read this one, and then I'll maybe read a few more. Homage to Life, 2003, one of her later ones. This black trapezoid isn't named death or murder or what a lover promises in the dark. Agnes named it Homage to Life. Near the end of her life, Agnes lived in an assisted living facility. Everything violent in the world can be made beautiful with language. Someone passes, departs, or succumbs. This is called advertising. The grids are finally gone. Even while at the facility, Agnes drove to her art studio each day to work. I think about the people who bathed her, who cut up her food into trapezoids. I wonder when she stopped painting and if she knew. I have a feeling the shape of her last breath was no longer a rectangle. I have a feeling her last word was in the shape of sovereignty. Every poem is trying to be the last free words on earth. I should have made it into trapezoid, but no, it's a square. Here's another one. She also did a lot of stripes. And so I'll read, just to give you a map, I'll read, maybe I'll read a few more. Untitled, number 9, 1995. Agnes only had 9 years to live. The angels must have begun to hover around her canvas like monkeys. This canvas has 9 white thin strips between the red and blue ones. I've spent my entire life thinking about the blue ones, thinking they were the future. But the future was red all along. I sense something is ending, but I'm not sure what. Maybe it's the future. This morning, I looked at a large spider web above my car. When I returned 10 minutes later, the weaver was gone, the web dismantled, but my hands were still open. Maybe a life doesn't matter so much as the feeling it leaves behind, whether anyone receives the feeling or not. Maybe our goal is to spend all the light, since none of us asked to be born. Okay, so I'll read two more. This one's called Starlight, 1962. And that's what Agnes's look like. I just love that so much. Very grid-like. And here's what my poem looks like. Suppose the stars are just our grief reflected back to us, proof that grief sometimes forgets its source, that it can find dead things no matter how distant. Everyone arrives one day and asks, "Is this it?" And the stars answer back with more stars. I wonder if Agnes started at the bottom or at the top, if she went left to right or right to left. There's no use in wondering if the canvas was on the floor or on a table. To ask questions is to be distracted by point of view. Point of view has a terrible memory. I've looked at photos scrolling up and over, zooming in and out, and realize it is not love I want, just the ability to zoom back out. A woman loses herself when she can no longer zoom out. Agnes knew that love exists because of the distance of starlight, that desire is the only thing with nerve endings, that it drips, that it dries faster in the desert. She knew to paint it vertically, but to hang it horizontally. And I'll read one more. This is my favorite Agnes Martin piece. It's huge. It's 10 by 10. So the thing I love about her work is the size and the scale. And you can walk into a museum and just see one from afar and it looks like gold. It would literally look just like one big gold square. And then as you get closer and closer, you start to see that there's just gold leaf grids on there. This was, I think, her only second piece that she made with gold leaf, but it's in the MoMA, New York. I think it's still there right now. If you ever are in New York, you should go see it. It's beautiful. It's called Friendship, 1963. I came to the city so I could see gold. When I arrived, though, the leaves were gold too, and I became confused. I called the front desk 4 times, and Angel answered each time. By the third call, he ended with, "Talk soon." In the morning, a different man answered, and I burst into tears. On 53rd Street, small children kept on running into me. A father yelled so loudly at the boy on the scooter that I thought he knew I was carrying death on my back. By the time I arrived at the museum, there was a long line. The bald man in front of me kept turning around to look at me. I could tell by his forehead that he could hurt me. When I finally found the room, I was the only one in there. Everyone else was below me in the Picasso room. While I stared at the gold rectangles, 2 attendants talked about whether to work overtime and get paid time and a half. I wanted to tell them that there's no such thing as time, just time and a half. Sometime in the night, Etel Adnan had died. I had just seen her paintings the day before. The crowds were large, and I wondered whether our looking had accelerated her death. When I took a photo of Agnes's piece, I saw my dark reflection on the gold. I started counting the grids, but the bald man came up next to me. Suddenly, there were 2 dark shadows on the gold. I asked him to step away, but when he said, "No," it was Agnes's voice. Thank you. So, yes, there's a microphone. So if you have a question, maybe you could raise your hand. I'm happy to answer anything you want me to, within reason. And if then the microphone, oh, there's one in the front, and there's another one up there. Thank you for running that microphone around.
Of course. Hello there. I'm Jillian. I'm one of the Eckerd students here today, and I just want to thank you so much for sharing your art with us. I was really curious how you approach the writing process with poems. I noticed that you don't rhyme very often, which I actually appreciate, and you're really a very good storyteller. So I'm curious, and now you're talking about in your newest book that you are limiting yourself through structure, like the stanzas and such. I'm really curious if you can just talk to at all your choice to kind of abandon those structures that have been used in the past to further your storytelling, or those choices that you've made when you start a new piece.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, I think that's a great question, because I think what I tend to do is just sort of, put my ear into the work and ask the work, what does it want to be? And for me, that seems to change from whatever it is I'm writing about. And so it's like, I was talking about it earlier today. It's like I think of it as like a container or vessel, or how you change your writing style over time, depending on how you grow or change as a person. So I think like my third and fourth books, there's a lot of sound play and sonic play. And that seemed sort of something fun to do at the time, and given the subject matter that I was writing about. And then, as time went on and, you grow up eventually. Maybe, I don't know, do we? We grow is what I should say. We grow and we change. And a lot of things changed in my life. And so I think that I kind of just let each thing in subject matter determine how to change my writing. And I like to change. So I know that not everyone likes to do that as a writer and artist, but I get very bored easily with myself. And so for me, it's a way to keep myself interested, a form of play. And I think of, for me, writing is very much so a form of play and enjoyment.
Victoria, this is kind of a formless question. I noticed when you were reading the poems that were on slips of paper, that you read them in terms of cadence, syntactically. You ran through the line and stopped at the syntactic grammatical units.
Yeah.
And looking at Agnes Martin, and the way the grid is everything, or the way structure, or at least the way structure is rendered, is everything for her. We would wonder, what is the structure by which you find order in composing your poems?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think that that you've mentioned syntax as one, right? That's word order. There's the line break, and I'm actually writing a craft talk on the line break as we speak. I was working on it on the airplane over, and probably will work on it on the airplane back. But I think the line break is a really important unit, right, of poetic composition. And before obit, I was primarily working with the line. And so I think that sound and line were probably very important to me. I think the line is really interesting. Like I've heard people call the line like a private utterance, and the sentence a public utterance. I thought that was really interesting to think about, because syntactically, if you read a poem, the line itself is its own unit, but then its sentence or fragment, depending on how you're writing, could run across to the next line. So then a line could have so much potential in terms of its meaning. It could be its own unit. If it's in like the middle of the poem, it could be a part of the sentence before and the sentence after. So that to me is what's interesting about a poem, is that kind of multiple possibility of the line break, and how you might stop at the end of a line and it could mean one thing to you. And then if you go back up, it means another thing. You go back down, it means another thing. And so I think that's what's kind of what I used to focus on a lot, is a line and sound. And now that I've been writing a lot more prose poems, which are these Agnes Martin, the line is arbitrary. So if you've taken off one of the stools of your legs of your stool, then what are you left with? What else do you have? Storytelling, to go back to your great question earlier, is a possibility. So I've been like, these are more narrative sometimes. Images, you have all the other things that are left. Syntax, word order, sound play, diction. Is it high? Is it low? Is it, what is it? Conversational? I think that it's interesting to think about, but I lost the line break to maybe as a form of challenging myself to see what else I could do, and to give myself, I had to sharpen everything. So I had to sharpen the images. I had to sharpen syntax. I had to really pay attention to the word order, and and just also where I was placing periods and commas and all those kinds of things. So that's sort of a really long answer to your great question. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Em. I'm an MFA student at the University of South Florida. Big fan.
Thank you.
Fangirling right now. But so I know you said that you never intended, or you never set out to write Dear Memory like that, and that the images came afterwards. But you have these ekphrastic poems and all those gorgeous visuals and stuff. So I'm kind of wondering how and if visuals and images kind of impact your work in ways that surprise you, maybe?
Yeah. Thanks for fangirling. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. And I think that images are a big part of, my writing process. And I think of me as sort of and we talked a little bit about this today in Casey's class, just needing something to talk to or correspond with. And I think it's because we're extroverts. We were talking about how writers aren't always extroverts, but I think I am. And so I'm constantly working through things in my writing, but I need somebody to talk to. And so sometimes it's images, and oftentimes it's images, actually. I've written ekphrastic poems almost since the very beginning. Other times there are other things, but I feel like I'm always in conversation. And when I gave myself those constraints in those miniature poems, I was conversing with someone else's poems. I was conversing with someone else's title, someone else's mind. And, with Dear Memory, I was talking to people that were mostly not alive. And so I think that helps me think, and is that audience or is that conversation partner? I don't think of it as audience, because most of these people or artwork, they're not going to necessarily read my writing, but it allows me to open up possibilities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And that's why I like looking at artwork and then writing ekphrastic poems, because there's no way you'd come up with the majority of lines if you didn't look at something, and talking about blue and stripes, and you have so much more vocabulary as a result of that conceit that you give yourself to actually have a conversation with something else. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nora. I'm also an Eckerd student. And this question kind of goes off of the question that was just asked, but it's sort of about how you found Merton's work and how that, how you found it to be inspirational, basically. And then also, do you often choose something to inspire you, or does it surprise you in its inspiration, or a little bit of both, really?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, and we were talking a little bit about this again today, what makes a piece of art, poem, story, fiction, or visual art, kind of why does some things strike you and why don't others? And we were talking about Barth's punctum and studium today, and I've been thinking a lot about why certain work appeals to me when I look at it and why others just don't. For me, I think Agnes Martin's work just struck me. Actually, it can change. So I've known about her work for a long time and read the writings, this she wrote these, she did writing. I love when visual artists do like write too. And I think that I found this really hard to find book called her writings, and then read it like a long time ago, and it didn't strike me. And but during the pandemic, just something about that work and the obsessiveness of it, it just hit me at the right time where I felt like I needed that work. So it struck me at a different time. I think of it as kind of like joy. People are like, go seek it, go find it. I actually think joy strikes us. It seizes us, and it comes when we least expect it. And so that's what happened to me with Agnes Martin's work. And I'm also always interested in being suspicious of my own opinions, because sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't like this work that much, or it doesn't appeal to me. But I'm always suspicious of myself, because I wonder if later, as I mature and grow up a little bit more, if something will strike me at a different time when I most need it. So that's kind of how that came about. And then I went around the country, not like a ton, but just kind of fell upon some of her work here and there. And when I saw it in person, it was pretty incredible. And there's one in the Norton Simon in Pasadena that I kind of went to go find. And so there, I think we develop these relationships with certain artists, musicians, poets, fiction writers that just it's like this kind of kinship. They speak to us just when we need it.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm also an Eckerd College student. I was wondering, in regards to your book, Dear Memory, do you find comfort in your writing? Do you often reread your work, just sort of finding it comforting?
Yeah. I don't know if I find my own work comforting. I'm actually pretty mortified by my own work. But I find the process of writing to be life-saving. It's so essential for me as a writer to be able to sit down and make something almost daily as a way to kind of survive as a writer and an artist. And I know that a lot of other writers and artists feel similarly. It becomes like water or food. I can't remember which one you die faster of if you don't have it. Is it water? Water. That was fast. 3 days or something like that. So yes, for me, it's like it's probably about 3 days. If I don't write something or read something or feel that feeling that I have when I'm feeling that I'm in touch with my inner artistic self, then I feel like I haven't had water and I feel like I'm going to die. So to me, that's important. The process is absolutely essential to my mental health and my well-being. But what comes out of it is actually probably embarrassing, like it is for a lot of writers and artists. Like, we don't want to look at it or read it again, kind of thing.
Hi. So we have an exhibit upstairs called The Shape of Dreams, and we're exploring where dreams come from, what their nature is, what their use is. And I wondered if you could reflect a little bit about the relationship between writing a poem and dreaming, in that there's so much dreamlike, not only imagery, but the recurrence of the man behind you, who now speaks with Agnes's voice, things that transpositions of person and place that are so dreamlike.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I really do love the surrealists. And so, I came earlier and went through the museum, and we did go through that exhibit. And the whole time I was thinking to myself, I just love that sort of wild imagination that Dalí had. And I do that in my poems. And I love the surrealist poets too. And I was saying this today too, it's like, I think staying in the quote unquote real, as much as the real isn't real, but the literal or the real memory doesn't interest me that much. And it's really fun to be able to go into the surreal or the dream or the daydream. You know, constantly I'm sitting around, and the more I allow myself to kind of think about nothing, the more the brain fills it up with all sorts of possibilities. And so I think for me, it's important to kind of sit quietly and just sort of empty out the brain, and then a rush of things go in it. And that's usually like strange, surreal kind of images that I really like to put in my poems. And I'm not afraid to kind of just let the real disappear and, you know, give voice to this person. The person is real, did stand in front of me while I was waiting in line, but obviously none of the other stuff happened. So I think that's really what's the fun part of making poems or making anything, is that possibility to discover as you go and while you're writing. That's so fun for me.
Hi, I'm Nancy. You mentioned your daughter,
Yeah.
and you also mentioned having time to dream and have quietness. And I was wondering how you balance being a writer, an artist, and a mother. And then also, as your children grow up, have you allowed them to read your poems, and how have they affected how you write?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, I think that now that my children are older, so 16 and 14, it's become easier for me to write because they can do things on their own, and you know they can walk by themselves, and you don't have to worry that they're going to fall in their forehead, which happens when they're toddlers, and they just have to watch them for a long time, I think. And so I didn't write as much. I wrote in interstitial spaces, and so yeah, friends sometimes ask me, why are you so prolific now? Where does this come from? Is I just have a little more free time. That's really quite simple. And so it's gotten like, you know, better in that way, time-wise. And then in terms of reading, it's funny you asked that story, because just maybe last week I walked in on my 14-year-old daughter who was, I thought she was laughing in her room, and it turns out she was crying, and she was shaking and crying, that kind of uncontrollable crying. And I was like, oh, shocked, but then I saw she's holding my book Obit, and then I was thinking, oh no. And so she had started reading it and read 3 poems and was bawling, and I felt really bad. But then I thought, well, it's okay. And I started to use it as a conversation starter. Why are you crying? And she said, well, I know all these people. I was there for some of this. And she's like, I think I need to take a break. And so she stopped reading after 3 poems. And then I think she read 2 more, and like at another time. And she said, oh, I said, did you cry again? And she said, oh yeah, I was still crying. So she's like, it's just so sad. And then I told her the story how lately, after the pandemic, I've been able to travel a little, and occasionally someone will come up to me, usually a young person, and just start crying and say that their father passed away, and if they're high school, when they're younger. And so we talked about that and how to use language and metaphor to kind of shape very difficult emotions and feelings. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I didn't think they would read it, but I think eventually I would if I were, growing, and I'd be curious at some point and then maybe read it. But it is a little bit mortifying to think of people very well reading it. It's easier to think of people you don't know reading it because it's more anonymous. But yeah, I think it was interesting. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but it just happened. So maybe I don't have any reflections because it was too recent.
Victoria, I think this may be about all the time that we have, but I wanted to just say thank you so much. And I did want to ask first say one thing. You have your older daughter here.
Oh, yeah.
Penny in the back of the room. Thank you so much, Penny, for coming also.
She's probably
I have to give you a shout out too. We're glad you're here.
Yeah,
to
she's
hear your
here.
mom. Yeah, and I was wondering, I just wanted to ask one thing about your use of form that I know that you've managed to weave in through a couple of your books in just an amazing way. You've got sonnets, you've got tankas, and you've got syllabic poems. Mm-hmm. Could you talk just for a minute about your use of form? And it strikes me, maybe in part because of Hank's question, and the use of the grid and the artwork that you love so much. It seems like there is a sort of relationship I'm really asking, is there a relationship when you choose to use form in your poems? Number one, why do you do it? What does it do for you when you choose to go that direction? And number two, is that at all related to your interest in that art?
Yeah, I mean, I think that form for me, Terrence Hayes, the poet, said form for him is like a bird flying in a cage, which I kind of love. But I always think about my bird as like a little wilder. It flies outside the cage and comes back, hopefully. But, I think for me, it allows me some boundaries. And I think because my brain maybe kind of goes out and bleeds out a lot. And so to put some, like sometimes I say bowling, when you bowl with little kids, you put, well, maybe not even little kids, when you bowl and you're not very good, you put the bumpers up, and the bumpers actually allow you to do a strike, which I think is kind of interesting. And I think for me, the formal boundaries actually allow my mind to wander a lot in the same way a sonnet traditionally allowed those poets to write really widely, because those subject matter of sonnets are usually quite large. And so I think it's counterintuitive. We think, oh, I don't want to be restricted, or you're restricting me. But actually, for me, it gives me a little bit of room inside to be really free. And so I think given my brain type, a wandering horizontal brain, it's helpful. And I think I need it to focus a little bit. Otherwise, I think I'd be even more all over the place. Yeah, thank you. Oh, you have one. There's one more question. That was just yeah, go ahead. Do you have? Yeah.
Actually, I had two things. Number one, I shall not sleep until I know why you left 11 letters off there. Be perfect driver.
I love it. You're a perfect driver?
No, be perfect.
Be perfect.
Driver when I'm
No,
right.
these are random boundaries. So I wanted to, first and foremost, I wanted to make them square. So in order to make them square, it largely depended on how many lines were there. But yeah, I think it's like the kind of situation where if you tried to fill it in, then it would not be square, or like it just would bump out. And so I kind of just let the endings fall where they fell, because in other instances, I think that the other ones, yeah, see, it's impossible. So if you can figure it out, let me know.
Oh, no. And secondly, I represent the Beach Art Center, and I've talked to you, and thank you for your support. And what I'm here tonight is to solicit people to write poetry for 66 pieces of art we have on the wall. And all you need is a business card. You send me your email address to what's on that business card. I will send you 5 or 6 pieces of art. You write, tell me what you're going to do, and we're in business. And it has been a wonderful thing at our art center over the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're very lucky to have Tombola Books. We'll be selling some books outside. Again, thank you to the Dalí Museum and their poetry series. Thank you to Hank and to Helen and to Kim and everyone here at Dalí. And special thanks to the Dr. Peter Monkey Fund for Creative Writing, which funds this wonderful series. Thanks for everyone to come out. Thank you, Victoria.